thanks for coming. It's Conifer Day. We'll try to show you some cool evergreens here. This is always a fun time of year when the fall colors are happening, all the plants are going dormant, and then what is left to look at all through the winter? Conifers usually, broadleaf evergreens and cool conifers. So certainly today, hopefully we'll show you a few different things. Some stuff that might offer you a little color, a little texture, you know, a little different form for the winter time. So I brought in quite a few. I always bring too many plants in here. There's probably another 100 different things out there to choose from, but hopefully give you a little idea of some different stuff we can look at. You'll see greens, whites, blues, yellows, different needles, different structures, weeping things, upright plants, a little bit of everything. But the biggest thing, you know, look at the blues, the whites, the yellows, you know, being that evergreen state. You know, we've got so much green around here. We can pop a little bit of blue, some different color in there, really stands out, especially in the winter time. Look at the growth habits. You know, we'll see a lot of signs around here. We'll be like globe shaped, you know, mounding, weeping, spreading, all the typical plants. You know, just like shrubs, we would see the same kind of growth habits. But keep in mind, the one thing is probably weeping. You won't see a lot of heights and spreads on our weeping plants because it's going to be up to you on what you guys want to do with it. Do you want to stake it up and have something taller or narrower that hangs down, or do you want to lop it off and let it grow more prostrate, wider and lower? So we could probably look at any weeping conifer out there, and again, it would be up to how you kind of want to train it in your own garden would be the big difference. Probably with no other plant here in the nursery, you pay for what you get when it comes to conifers. You're going to see some things like, how could that be $20 for that little teeny plant and the other one's $10 for something twice as big? It's all on growth rate. You know, that's the one big thing with conifers. It takes a lot longer for it to finish off and get to size for the garden center. But a lot of times you'll see that word dwarf, and it's probably the most important word we'll talk about today, because your brain is going to think, what? Dwarf. Ooh, this little tiny little conifer I probably never have to touch again. You gotta look at the size and what dwarf it is, because there's a lot of dwarf things that'll get 10 or 20 feet tall versus the regular species. Wow. Other things will never get bigger than a foot by a foot. So we really have to be careful when we look at dwarf. And then miniature is probably what you think of as really dwarf. So miniature stuff we carry quite a bit of that just grows an inch, maybe 2 inches a year. So that would never outgrow the spot. It'd be a little bit easier. You know, and you'll see some, I brought a couple in, you'll see like this one in particular, and you see that cryptomeria. Nothing wrong with that, that's starting to turn color for winter. So that instead of being green with yellow tips during the growing season, I'm going to get that beautiful bronzy, rusty color over the winter. You'll see another one over there starting to turn purple. So you'll see a lot of these things are one color. Spring, summer, fall, we start to get cold, we cool off, and we start to turn a little different color going into the winter time. So we can look at all this stuff here. We'll show you a bunch of pictures, but when it comes down to it, there's really two types of conifers in the entire earth. So we call them whorl conifers. So think of your Christmas tree. You go buy a Christmas tree, you bring it inside. What do you got? A noble fir with what? Big central trunk and little rings or whorls of branches in a perfect little kind of pyramid Christmas tree form, right? So that's our taller trees a lot of times. Pine, spruce, true firs like our Christmas tree, things like that are always going to be whorl. On the other hand, we have random branch conifers. So if we think of our arborvitae hedge, juniper, yews, lots of other conifers, if I look at the difference, you know, here's a pine right here. You know, that's a weeping pine, but what do I have? I still have a trunk, and I have whorls of branches with gaps in between them. That's how those are always going to grow. If I look at this cedar, what's different about that? It's bushy, it's thick, it looks like a shrub. I'm going to have random branching all through it, which might make it a little easier to prune, is the biggest difference. So think of maybe these, I can clip as a hedge a little bit. Other conifers, I'm not going to have quite as much luck pruning a whorl like that, okay? When you go out and shop here at the store, you're going to see everything two ways. You can see two pictures there, one with the root ball and a burlap sack. This time of year we get a lot of field grown things in. Sometimes we'll have them out in burlap for a little bit, or we will slip them into a pot with compost to sell them. But those field-grown plants are probably a little heavier for weight, but also a little bit bigger for the money. So maybe you save a little bit of money getting a field-grown plant, a little bit older thing for a little less cash kind of deal. But the very reason I put these on here is the number one mistake people buy, not just conifers, but anything that is balled and burlapped. You take the burlap off and you throw it in the hole and the plant doesn't live. Do not take the burlap off. That's the biggest thing you can do against your plants, is you don't want to take that burlap sack off until it's in the hole. We simply cut the twine around the trunk, either peel it down the sides, or I use my scissors and just chop the top excess off, bury it. It'll rot away very quickly, but we cannot leave it tied to the trunk. Eventually that twine will get into the wood and we'll have some damage on our tree, okay? But a lot of people will buy a burlap one, do the right thing they think, and cut all the twines off, and then pick that root ball up and drop it in the hole, and if it cracks or gets disturbed, conifers take about 5-6 months to slow death. So if you do that, you're going to walk out 6 months and end up calling me, that hinoki I bought from you last March and it's August now, is turning brown, it's not going to live. Okay, well that's probably the reason why, is we cracked that root ball. So be real careful with the burlap stuff. The container grown ones, you know, any plant I pull out, I'm going to see that fibrous root system inside the can, and I don't have to rip it apart. I'm not going to chop it in half. I'm not going to get a chainsaw and start chopping it up. I just want to get my pruner tip or a little trowel. If we lightly score the outside of those roots and loosen up the bottom a little bit, not rip it apart, we can slip that in, and that will let that little plant know you can quit growing in a circle, and now you've got some free soil to kind of establish it, okay? So very important with conifers, because like I said, this is like a 6-month deal with conifers. If you plant something and it doesn't like where you put it, or something happened at transplant, it usually takes about 6 months for it to slowly crash and burn kind of thing. So just keep an eye on the planting time. Now before we start looking at some plants, if we just talk a little bit about some tips that I would give you if you're looking at adding a conifer to your yard. You know, we talked about colors and textures and forms. You know, those are probably a few things to consider. How much room do you have and all the above. But really look at some of this other stuff. Pay attention to growth rate. All of our tags from Isley in particular, the best conifer grower on earth, right on the back there, it's going to tell me a garden size, not a 10-year size, but how big it's going to get in my garden, and a growth rate. 3 inches a year, 2 inches a year, 4 inches a year, a foot a year. That's going to let me know, okay, that's really going to take off. Maybe I'm trying to block something or get a taller tree. I want to get something a little faster growing. Most people, I think, these days are looking for something a little slower and steadier usually, so pay attention to your growth rate. Drainage is always the biggest thing with conifers. You know, we have rain, we have heavy soil, we have acidity. All that's not a problem, but we have to be really careful we're not getting too wet in the winter. So as long as the water is draining out of that structure, you know, we pop a spruce or a pine above hard pan clay, you're going to struggle. It's just not going to thrive long term. So make sure we've got adequate drainage in our soil when we're digging our holes. A little compost will help fix that during planting time. But I would certainly, especially this time of year, dig down a couple of feet. Am I hitting hard pan? Do I need to get some of that out of my way? Maybe you put a bunch of water in there and see if that drains through the soil, or does it just puddle up in your hole and sit there for hours? Okay, we've got to do something a little different or get a different plant. The ones probably that could take a little bit more wet would be some of your cedars. You know, they're going to be okay if we have a little bit heavier clay soil, a little wet. Dwarf cedar, taller cedars, any of the above. Yews tend to be a little bit better in that situation too, but not the firs, not the spruce, not the pines. We would want the opposite, kind of high and dry for those. Pay attention to the sun and shade. I mean, most all conifers are going to like full sun or part sun. There are some things that will do some shade. We tend to keep a lot of hemlocks in particular. If you're looking for something small for a little shadier spot, maybe some hemlocks, some yews again. And there's always a cultivar or two of most of the other conifers that probably would take a little bit more shade than sun as well. So that's one to maybe ask if you're not sure. If you think you have deep dark shade, we got to go one direction for sure. But most of the part sun, part shade to full sun, we can utilize most all the conifers. Fertilizing, You know, you shouldn't have to pump food on any of these all the time, and this is not something that you want to feed, you know, 4 or 5 times a year like we would do with some of our annuals and things. So if you can feed it once coming out of winter, usually about 1st of March or so, maybe one more time in the summer, that's probably more than plenty. I would just feed it when I planted originally to help get the root system going, but you shouldn't have to go through and put food on it once a month to keep it growing. Maybe again, you're trying to get something growing real fast. Okay, you could use a little extra food on that, but typically once or twice a year is more than enough to keep the conifers happy. We were talking about this before we started, but flagging in the fall, Steve wrote about that a few weeks ago, I think, on our articles about all the brown down the center. If I have any evergreen, the natural process is if I look in the middle of any of these, I'm probably going to find some brown needles in the interior. There's nothing wrong with that plant necessarily, but the drier the summer, the wetter the winter, then the drier the summer that follows, typically will have more of that old growth shedding. We always use the word, you know, evergreen, quote unquote, but no plant keeps its needles forever. So that's kind of a misleading label. You got 3 years typically on most plants, including conifers. It grows out 1 year, next year, 3rd year, then that old stuff starts to shed in the heat of the summer and the fall because the new growth has taken its place that spring. So you're always going to have that little bit of dropping of old growth in the center as the new replaced it for that year. So if we have brown out to the tips, we got a problem. You know, then we need to get a diagnosis, something else is going on. If it's just in the middle, I can almost promise you it's just flagging. Something would be a natural process. We already went through and cleaned out most of our pines. It was probably the biggest one I've seen for a while, the pines in particular. There's a lot of brown coming on the pine trees here after the dry summer. So you can rake it out if you want. Mother Nature will eventually get it out of there for you. I'm kind of OCD in my yard, so I'll usually walk around and get most of that brown out on my own here in the next month or two. Okay? If we're going to transplant something is the last thing here. You know, with all plants, we want to do that over the winter. So you got probably a month or so still. I would not be in the rush to run home and dig something up yet if it's been on the ground. Usually Thanksgiving, once we get a good frost, you got all winter long to move things around until like the next March. So during the dormant season is when we would want to carefully dig one up and relocate it if we wanted to. A lot of the dwarf ones, not too bad. I've moved some conifers around my own yard over the years. You're not going to have very good luck moving a big, huge weeping Alaskan cedar or something that's substantial. That's going to need a piece of equipment to get it moved safely. We can't bare root a conifer. We've got to take a big chunk of earth with it to get it to live. So sometimes, all right, that's just too big. We got to cut it down, get the roots out of there, and replace it with something smaller. Or if it's still young enough, we could carefully dig that up with a root ball and relocate it to where it does have a place to thrive. Okay? So if we look through, you know, maybe I can show you some of these plants here. Well, I'll show you a few pictures kind of fast and furious because I wanted to give you a little taste of kind of some of the things that we carry and some of the information we use on our signs. So you'll see that little triangle logo on a lot of plants around here. I mentioned Sunnyside Nursery. That's one of my favorite places on earth, going back about 35 years that I've known them now. We get a lot of their plants in. They're the world-renowned collectors of really cool conifers. A lot of miniature, a lot of dwarf stuff, and a lot of hard to find things. You know, the price isn't the cheapest in the world, but we pay for quality. They got the best grafters and they have the best variety. So it's, again, if you look at something that looks a little steep, it's because it probably grows too slow and it takes them a long time to get them going. I used to have a poster, you know, in my office because a lot of the staff would ask the same thing, you know, why is that $100? It's like, okay, well, let me show you. And they would set it up by years. When they graft a little conifer, you know, a little starter plant like that, to get it into a specimen that you would come down and purchase, you know, that's a 10, 12-year process. So this isn't something like an annual flower or a perennial. We could propagate it, we can grow it, we can turn it over in a year and sell it again at a lot less price. This is stuff that takes a long time to get up to size. So the bigger it is, the slower it grows. Tends to be a little bit more money that way. So if we look at a few firs here first, you can find all this. They got a great website. You know, I send customers there all the time. If you're looking for something cool, I'm like, go look, tell me if something we don't carry. We're happy to order in for you. You might get overwhelmed, I'll warn you, if you go to their website and look at the variety choice. There's probably 50 Hinoki cypress, I think, on there alone that they grow. So there's some really fun stuff, and I may not carry all of it, but we're happy to try to get it for you if you do see something on there you like. So the first section here is firs. So true firs. Douglas firs, not a true fir. Our native Douglas fir is a different plant. That's later in the list here. But true firs like noble fir, Shasta fir, balsam fir, grand fir, anything in that genus Abies. So a few of the cool dwarf stuff here. I brought one of these up, like Cis. That's a little Korean fir called Cis. I'm looking for something dark green, small, easy, soft, not prickly. If I got good drainage and I got pretty good sunshine, this one will be good in part sun as well. I got a nice, cool little soft evergreen I can use for a little bit of texture in there. So that would be a Cis, very small. If you wanted something with a little color, I brought a little baby one in, but those look like little flock Christmas trees. That's Icebreaker. So that's one, the price has come down to a more reasonable level here the last few years. That was a pretty spendy plant 2 years ago when I bought mine, unfortunately. Now they're not quite as bad. But that's, again, something that's just growing an inch or two a year and not going to get very big at all. We put one in the Arboretum I did myself. Might be 2 feet tall, 3 feet wide down the road. Yeah, very, very slow. Something like golden spreader. I had this in my last yard. I'm looking for, again, something that's got a nice frost of yellow. True fir is soft, so it's not quite as prickly. But that would make a little bigger specimen, maybe 3 foot tall, 6 foot wide. If I'm looking for part shade, that's a great one to do if you got like morning sun, afternoon shade. That would give you a really nice glow of lime green yellow. One of my favorites is this one. I've had one for 20 years in my front bank in the full sun. So that's noble fir without a leader. So that'll never turn into a tree, but this would cascade amongst rocks and kind of flow through a rockery, which is where I have mine. Beautiful powder blue color. And that gets a very minimal height, but spread. And I can certainly prune it to size, but that might be something, that's me. I mean, mine's been in 20 years and I'm about 3 feet tall, maybe 6 feet across, and kind of a cool little mounding specimen in my own rockery. Something like Japanese fir. There's an example of something you can see the close-up. If I looked at that plant in 3 different ways, I would probably see blue, I would see green, I would see silver, and I even see a little touch of yellow in there. So if you like some cool colors, that might be a little bushy fir from Japan that's got some pretty fun little colors and textures going. If we looked at Cephalotaxis, so this is what we call plum yew. Is anyone, you guys familiar with yews? Like little narrow, dark green, English yew, Irish yew. There's a lot of yews. We'll show you a couple. You'll see like the little telephone pole. There's one, that little gold one right there in the front. So that's a little yew. Very clippable. That's a common plant we use for containers or hedges. This would be the larger needle version. We have a few of these out there, and we'll get more again, that would have a bigger fruit. So if you see yews, they'll get a little red berry on them, kind of look like little Christmas lights here in the fall. The Cephalotaxis gets a much larger berry on it, looks like a little plum. So if you like the kind of the fruit on there, they do get a cool little kind of bonus in the fall, winter, as we have those little fruits hanging on them. This one would look like a big cigar, narrow, upright, almost a little tropical-y appearance with the bigger needles, but that would be a fun consideration. Or we have hedgehog. That's a little low-growing one, so bigger needle again. That would eat up some ground left to right and not so much tall on that. That's a really good filler plant, especially again part shade. We've added some of these into different gardens over the years, and that one thrives as kind of a nice, easy green filler. We got lots of Hinoki cypress around. I mentioned that one before. Before I show you a few here, I would say this. Hinokis want high and dry. This would be the last thing I would do if I have wet drainage issues or clay. If I have hot sun, I don't want to water very much, I have a lot of different hinokis in my yard, and I don't have to water them at all anymore. So this is a plant that would like to be high and dry. There's huge trees, little tiny miniature ones, which is a huge variation in hinokis, and we probably have right now even 20 different ones around here, sometimes a lot more than that in the spring as well. So butterball, perfect name, looks like a little ball of butter. You know, that's going to grow just an inch or two a year, give me some nice bright yellow, and that one like 2 feet by 2 feet, and that'd be a long time from now before it got that big. We have something like fern leaf or fern spray hinoki cypress. That's going to give me the texture of a fern or a little different plant. That's a beautiful green one to use in pots even, or if I'm looking for a bigger specimen in my sun garden, you know, that will get bigger and bushier. That's like a 10 foot by 7 foot kind of thing. So a big specimen hinoki with a little bit extra texture on it. If we like a little white, you know, we could have some Mauritii. That would take, again, a little bit more on the part shade, part sun side. That might get 4 feet by 3 feet, but I would have a nice white flecking of variegation on the green. That's a little different color on that one. We would have something like Melody. That's one of my favorites. I love yellow, so bright yellow is the way I go. I think we brought one in here somewhere. I think it's down in front there. You got it. So Melody is one that came out just a few years ago, and I think a really manageable size. And that one would take morning sun and shade in the afternoon if you like a little yellow, so it doesn't need all day sun. And I'm going to have a really nice uniform yellow hinoki with a little bit of blue in there too, which is kind of nice. That's got some great color going. We have dwarf ones. See, here's a great example of the difference between, like we saw Butterball versus this old one called Nanilutea. Butterball, super tiny. Nanilutea, I got one right here. Super slow growing. It's not going to get big very fast, but down the road I would get bigger with that one. You know, a little bit more pyramid shape and a little bit taller, but I would still have that nice yellow in there. There's contorted ones like Sunny Swirl. That would have a little bit of twist on the branches and some cool red bark. If you like a little something different, that's a fun one to try. And then we have some kind of saguaro cypress, so not quite hinoki. These are a piscifera, a little different species, but cumulus is one I have in my yard. Looks like a big ladybug. It's like 20 years old, might be 1.5 feet across and about 1 foot tall. Looks like a little frosting of blue on there. It's got a little blue-green color to it. And then if you want to go blue, like the curly top saguaro cypress, mine's about 8 feet. After 20 years, I have one of these in my front garden. So not old boulevard cypress, which we see around that gets ginormous. This would be the garden size of old boulevard cypress. A little more manageable, but a really nice dose of blue if you like the blue. Then some small yellow, like our little pin cushions. I want something that just grows 1 foot, 1.5 feet, and will spread into a little mound with a little yellow. Looks like a golden pin cushion. That's a perfect name for it. On something, again, hot, dry, full sun, good drainage. The cryptomerias, I think, are really fun. I brought a couple in here. This is a cryptomeria going with the winter color. You can see the little bronze coming through. The mushroom's a different cryptomeria with the purple going on it. We have other ones out there with really ropey texture. If you look at this snake one, that's a gigantic tree down the road, so that'll get big. But most of these will have a very different ropey texture. So if you're looking for something fun to add to the garden that doesn't look like a lot of our typical evergreens, cryptomeria might be the perfect plant for you. That's a great climate swap from Japan. About the same growing conditions, temperatures, all the rest, but they thrive around here. Something like Black Dragon will give me a little bit of a dark green texture with no winter color. That's one I have in my front yard called Golden Promise. We have one of these up here too somewhere. I think it's in the front. But that would give me yellow a little bit on top of green on that kind of, again, Japanese cedar look. And then Little Champion's a classic one. Again, you can kind of see the different texture on that if you're looking at that. That's a cool plant. And then we also have trees. So I think I still have Rensden's Jade left out there. That'd be a big 25, 30 foot tree down the road. But that would turn the purple in the winter. So ours is already turning color and you would have a really magnificent evergreen with a little winter color. Or we do something like the second Suji, big full size one again, but I would have the frosting of yellow all over the top of that one. That's a really popular one for the Christmas wreath makers around here. We use a lot of that for in our custom Christmas wreath classes. Then we have some cypress. So Wilma, everybody probably knows Wilma. Everyone had a Wilma in their pot yet? The little lime green, yellow, little narrow cypresses. They're probably the most common thing. We use in pots every year. We can also grow them in the ground. I have 2 of these off my own patio at my place in Everett that I use for some yellow. But that's one we could shear. Smells like lemon. You know, you tell it what to do. You clip it. They grow pretty slow. I don't know that I've ever seen one 12 feet tall, but probably 6 or 8 when we get an old one if we don't clip it. There's one of those bad words. If I say juniper, does everyone go, ugh, right? You say juniper, everyone starts frowning. Juniper is not a bad word. This is not the rat nest bad junipers from the 1970s and 80s that I would have ripped out of my yard too with the chainsaw and the truck. Juniper serves a purpose. Hey, I like a gin and tonic, so we get our berries, gin berries from juniper. That's one reason, but juniper is drought tolerant and really minimal maintenance. And I'm not saying we fill our yard with junipers, but I think there are spots where people hear the word juniper, don't want it, but they're not really looking at what modern junipers do. And I can go something narrow. I brought a narrow upright one in here. I think it's down in front. Yeah, there's a pencil juniper right there. That's a great hot, dry sun container plant, focal point plant, just like this picture. And I might just be a foot wide and 6 feet tall. I'm looking for just a little vertical accent for something fun that I don't have to mess with. If that's got good drainage and hot sun, you probably never touch that thing again. They do not need much care at all. Or we look at a lot of ground cover junipers. I've got a bank, I've got sunshine, I've got bad soil, I don't water out there at all. There's yellows and blues and greens and all sorts of really cool flat growing junipers that we can use as a good weed suppressant, drought tolerant, and get some fun color on them too. So don't hate junipers, all of them. There's some we would never carry anymore, but there's some good ones around if you've got the hot sun and need something good drought tolerant. Now there are a few conifers that are deciduous. Conifers aren't all evergreens. They don't keep their needles in the winter. One example is larch. You know, that's a beautiful conifer. It turns about as pretty color as anything in the fall, but now all those needles drop every winter, and you might look out and go, my conifer died. Well, no, it didn't. It'll be back again in March when it leaves back out again for 2024. So this is a great example of the weeping larch. We carry upright ones too and little dwarf shrubby ones, but you can see the difference in the summer. Beautiful lime green, soft needles on larch, and then beautiful golden orange color in the fall as we start to turn every winter. Now that's also a weeping one, so again, I can do what I want to train. You can see right there it says garden size, varies with culture. How's that for a nondescript size? But again, I could stake it, I could lop it off, I can do whatever I wanted to do with that weeping larch to train it for my own yard. So we don't have to let it get tall. We could let it stay low and bushy and wide, or we could stake it up and have a tall, narrow kind of weeping specimen, either way. There's an example of a shrubby larch. I like Volterdingen, that sounds fun. Something sounds funny about a German Volterdingen Japanese larch. How's that? You got to mix the two together. But that's one we usually have around. We carry Romberg Park, a few other larches that would give me that seasonality with the conifer. I would get great fall color on them. Super, super hardy. We would leaf right back out in spring, and off we go. Now, I was teaching up on Whidbey Island yesterday, actually, and we are having a discussion about microbiota. Me and a guy were having a fun talk about it. Because this in the nursery trade is what we call chocolate. We don't say brown. Things that turn brown in the winter, brown sounds dead, right? But if we say chocolate, it's like, ooh, that's a cool color for the winter. So Siberian cypress looks a little like juniper. Some people call it Siberian juniper or cypress, totally different plant. But this is one of those bulletproof plants, you know, super hardy, like 50 below zero to the Arctic Circle. It takes shade, it takes sun, it takes walking on, it takes pruning, it takes whatever you want, and it still grows. So this is one that would be green spring, summer, fall. We get towards the cold days of the winter, it turns that purplish brown, that chocolate color that is kind of fun over the winter. It's a little different color tone depending on what your tastes are, but certainly a plant to consider. We get some awful front spruce in here. You can see, I think I left it down front. Oh, right here. Can you see that one with all the cool tip cones on it? So that's probably our best-selling evergreen. It might be our best-selling plant around here. That's this. It's called Push, a little miniature Norway spruce. So it's bright red in the spring. When the cones come out, they look like scarlet red. Really cool color. And then this time of year, we're left with the cones on all the tips of the branches, which is really fun over the holidays. So that would be hot sun, drought tolerant. Again, not very big. That plant might be like 2 feet tall, 3 feet wide. That's a little miniature evergreen. Not going to get super big, but certainly a really cool one with the cones. And then again, the red color comes springtime. We could look at jasper. If you go up up into Alberta, you'll see Engelmann spruce. Again, super hardy, nice blue color. We always keep some jasper around. That's a little dwarf form of Engelmann spruce that will give me that bluish color to it, but have a nice, tidy, easy form for, again, those hot, dry, cold areas. I like Serbian spruce myself. You know, that's one I think I brought a small one in here with a little bush form in the corner on top. But that's one, if I looked at, I would see blue, I would see green, I would see silver, I would see some really cool colors, a little stiffer structure to Serbian, but probably the best ones against bugs. If we fight any bugs on spruce, the Serbians are the most resilient. And I can get, again, dwarf bushy one, or I can get a full-sized evergreen. Probably the coolest thing about Serbian is narrow. You know, if we get the right cultivar of Serbian, I ran whites down Linwood for a lot of years until I came up here about 13 years ago. We had Serbian in our parking lot. We decorated for Christmas every year, having a good Christmas shop. But this thing was 30 feet tall, but I could almost wrap my arms around the base of it. It looked like a perfect Christmas tree, you know, sentinel, but we don't have to eat up a lot of space side to side. We'd have something nice and narrow. Oriental spruce, we'll get a little yellow on. You know, this is a great example of Isley. I think what they've done for homeowners and for nursery customers, you know, this is one of their introductions. You can see right on there, and this took 20 years to breed that Firefly Oriental spruce. Oriental spruce was always a 30, 35, 40 foot gigantic evergreen. Now we've got something like 6x4. That seems to be the spot for the modern yard. So after 20 years of seed growing and grafting and crossing and trialing, they finally got a perfect, consistent, miniature golden kind of little Oriental spruce. So that's a good example of kind of Isley for you. Lots of blue spruce around. So if you like that powder blue color, again, super cold hardy, super drought tolerant. As long as we got good drainage and good sun, I don't think you'll have to touch the spruce much around our area. We've got ground cover ones like procumbens. You know, I got a flat rockery or a big sunny mound. I just want to let it drape around and cover up some area. That would be a great choice if you like blue. You know, if we buy regular blue spruce, you know, what happens? Anyone got regular Colorado blue spruce in their yard? You know, I've had it at my place in Clealum, but we get up really tall and it's always green, 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 and I have a little bit of blue on the tip. So if I want blue spruce, I'm going to pay the money for a named cultivar or a named clone, because now I'm going to get the tight shape, the growth habit I want, and the superior color for sure. The brand new one that just came out from Isley, they have a new collection called the Blues. They've been breeding spruce now for about 20 years and brought out finally the first two new ones this year. So that's one called Monty that would look like the Sester's dwarf I have on the screen. So I want my Christmas tree powder blue, perfect shape, but I just need it like 6, 8, 10 feet tall. I don't need a 20, 30 foot gigantic spruce down the road. That's the kind of stuff we would use for that location. We have the weeping one called the Blues. Look at that. It's got a great little shape to it, a little skirt on the ground. You know, I could stake that up again. Weeping, what does that say? Varies by culture. I love that word there. So I could stake that up, and I could have my tall, narrow one and just let it flow down a little skinnier, or let this crook over and make a beautiful mounding specimen, kind of like the pine is doing here, depending on what you need in your yard. Then we get some pines. So the Chief, anyone got the Chief Joseph in here? Joe's got, we got a couple of Chief. That's the holy grail for the conifer collector. That's what everybody wants. There's a Chief right there. I got one tucking in the middle. So Chief Joseph is a lodgepole pine, and I think it's a fun plant to talk about for a minute because it kind of shows maybe how lucky we get sometimes and how some things are easy to grow but hard to propagate. So those have traditionally not been very cheap. I think they're getting more reasonable the last couple of years. But Chief Joseph is one a logger found over in the Wallowa Mountains. So that is a lodgepole pine that's native around here. But a logger looked up and said, luckily he had half a brain, and said, wow, that's really cool. What's that yellow branch growing out of that old lodgepole pine? So luckily, like I said, he had a brain, cut it out of there very carefully, took it to somebody who could do something with it, and then we have a new plant that we can kind of have as homeowners. So they're very hard to graft. I talked to Isley, like, why are you charging so much for the Chief? It's been around a while. And he said, well, because for every 1,000 I graft, I might get 100 to grow. And once they grow, you're okay, but it's a really hard plant to get to take originally, which is why the price maybe is a little bit more than some other typical pines. So if I walk by that Chief Joseph in April, June, July, August, you'd be like, why did he sell me this garbage pine? Looks like every other pine tree I've ever seen. Green, nondescript, just sits there in the yard. Then we get cold in the fall and it turns yellow. So the entire winter month, that thing just glows golden yellow and almost orange sometimes on a real cold winter. Spring, it's right back to green again. So it's a really cool plant for color, and it's not a big grower. Lodgepole pine's pretty narrow. We can always clip the candles a little bit if we wanted to, but I don't know that I've ever seen one bigger. I might go a little bigger than Isley. I might have seen one maybe 10 feet tall once or twice, like 10 by 4, you know, not a gigantic plant by any means, but kind of a fun one. The Chief, we call him. Now I always insult the Mugo and I call it the poor man's Chief Joseph, like me, what I would buy. But winter, the golden Mugo pines is a really easy way to go. You can see the Chief right there. If I hop up here and grab the golden Mugo, I get what? That same effect, something that goes bright yellow over the winter, that's much more manageable in size and substantially a little less money too. So that's a little shrub shaped one that I would never turn into a tree. I could clip it and keep that like a little round shrub in my yard, but I would get to enjoy that beautiful gold winter color on it, just like the Chief. We've got narrow ones like Austrian pine, like Comet. You know, I want something, again, I want the height, but I don't want the spread. You know, there's a good choice for you on something that will get tall, but not overpower the garden side to side. Lots of really cool parviflora pines. These are some of my favorite pines. The Japanese white pines, we call these. We can go yellow, lots of blues, we can do silvers. This is probably the top of the list for no water. I'm going to tell you, I have one staff person in here, but my staff usually kills these by watering them too much, so we have signs on them that says, please don't water me, and we let them go really dry. This is one I have on a front bank at my place that hardly ever gets any water all year. In the wintertime, it drains right out, and he is happy as can be for all these years out there. So no clay, no wet. If you put them in a pot, keep it dry. This is one we want to keep definitely in full sun and a little on the dry side. We've got eastern white pine. You know, if you've been back east and seen these native, you know, there's an 80-foot tree. You know, eastern white pine gets huge. You know, we certainly can do those around here just the same, but we tend to get a lot of dwarf versions of that, like mini twist. Cool little contorted needle, looks like a shrub, but I would have that same silvery blue-green color like typical eastern white pines, but just on a more of a garden size. This is the weeping one right here. There's eastern white pine in a weeping form. That's Niagara Falls. So instead of the old weeping white pine that would bury my house, because I've seen it done a few times, Now I've got something I can actually have in the garden and keep contained in a cool rockery or as a specimen, and not let it get so tall and get up onto my house. Even little sea urchin, that's probably the best name for little plants. That's exactly what it looks like. We have little sea urchins out there. I want a little miniature round eastern white pine, a little spiky silver blue green color to it. That's exactly what it looks like, a little sea urchin. That's a very small grower. We've got things like thunderhead, that's Japanese black pine. So that would be one, big, bushy, and wide. Sometimes you see those sculptured, you know, on the cloud prunes and things, but a much longer needle and a very prominent candle on those. You can see that white color on the tips sitting there for the next year's growth. This is typically the only Japanese black pine we get in on the dwarf side. But again, there's a great example of dwarf. There's dwarf 15 feet by 12. Okay, if we had regular Japanese black pine, we're going to get up more like 35, 40 feet by 25. So it is a dwarf, but that's not going to be a little dwarf like we've been talking about on some things. They call these mountain plum pines or totara. So Podocarpus is a really cool conifer genus that's more native to the southern hemisphere. A lot of times we see these like New Zealand, Australia, different places, but they're plenty hardy up here. This is probably, believe it or not, at the top of the drought tolerance list. I have a lot of people ask for Podocarpus that have been reading online and looking for things that need the least amount of water of all plants on earth. Podocarpus are up there towards the top of that list. So very cool plant. For texture, it looks a little like a yew. We've still got a few of these out there. We'll have more again. But we've got choices like Blue Gem. That's one called Red Tip that actually has a little red new needle going on it. We've got a really cool new one called Gelaco out there that almost turns like a purple black color in the winter, which is really fun. But all kind of bushy, low, easy to prune if you needed to. But great for sun. Great for those sandy, gravelly, kind of alpine-y gardens where the water runs right through and we just don't need a lot of moisture. That'd be a good choice. Some really fun ones. I brought one up here. You'll see in the front. See the dark green? Almost looks a little tropical. This guy right here in the front. So this is a new one called Propeller. Can you see the needles? They kind of twist like a propeller, which is really cool. But that's what we call Japanese umbrella pine. So that is not a pine. It's called Cyadopodes. It's in a little different plant. This is one of those kind of rare conifers from the Far East. They grow great here. I remember my grandmother had one growing up. My folks have had one. I've had one. They're really fun to grow for something different. They'll take a little more shade if you need. You don't have to be in full sun. But depending on the cultivar you choose, I can kind of get like Green Bullet, short and stout, or I can go much taller, you know, up 20, 25 feet if I want a full-grown one in my yard too. Most of the new stuff that's coming out has been much more dwarf. So again, for modern gardens, kind of that size, you know, Green Bullets 4x3. Then I've got a tall one there, and tall and narrow one called Joe Cozy. That would be like 20 feet tall, but only 6 feet across. So big, tall, narrow, evergreen focal point. And there's lots of other varieties of those we get in. Green Star, Green Bullet. We've got Piccola out there. We've got quite a few if you just want something a little smaller scale. We've got just a couple left here, some yews. So I've always liked yews myself because I think for gardeners, these are really easy to prune. They're not too crazy. I can get the chainsaw on the stick out even and give them a top or shear them on the sides. And a lot of this I can use for hedging or a narrow focal point if I'm just trying to break up a house. I tell people a lot of times you got the two-story, you know, house in the, you know, part shade again. You know, what can I put on that wall that would give me a little bit of height and break it up so I've got garden, you know, layering the garden again. Use a really easy one to get a good focal point, something tall, narrow, kind of a spire that we can do in green or yellow. You know, if we like a little yellow, some color on there, we can go either way. So dwarf, the Goldener Schwerg is kind of a dwarf gold one. That might be like 6 feet by 3 across. That's one we always have around. This is Boltnick Orange or Orange Beauty. That would be maybe even a little taller, but even narrower as that gets old. We always keep those around. Or again, if you don't like yellow, these are all come green too. We have bushy ones. This is one I have in my yard called Dwarf Bright Gold. Again, be careful with the word dwarf. Mine's about 4 feet tall, 6 feet across. You know, in the U world, that's a dwarf, but it is just almost put your sunglasses on in the spring. It is so yellow, super bright. That would make a really easy specimen as well that you can clip. Or a little lower, we would have Japanese style yew like Nana Orescens. That's a popular purchase around here for folks that like bright yellow, want something soft and easy that just stays nice and low. That'd just be something a couple of feet tall that would spread if I wanted it to into a little larger area, but it's not going to get a whole bunch of height to it. Some of the new arborvitaes. So we've got our little green soldiers. Everybody tends to have a fence of arborvitae somewhere. I swore I would never have one, and I have one side of my house with arborvitae because I didn't want to see my neighbors. So it serves its purpose if you like living fence. But there's a lot of really cool arborvitaes that we would not do that with, that we would grow in the garden as a really fun specimen. I think Primo is one of the coolest plants on the property. That came out a few years ago. We go through a lot of those these days for a really cool, almost bonsai itself arborvitae. That's got some fun texture, loves hot, loves the dry, won't have to do much to that at all. It gets a little winter color on it too, which is fun. But Primo, maybe 4 feet by 1 feet, and that'd be an old one. These grow really slow. So that's a plant we always have around. Or maybe we want some yellow. You know, we can do something like Jantar. We've got highlights out there. We've got a bunch of really cool hybrid arborvitaes. You know, if this was around 20 years ago when I did my hedge, I probably would have did mine yellow or alternated yellow-green to make them more interesting instead of just having a green wall. So we can do a lot of golden arborvitaes these days as well. We named this our nursery guy, Mr. Frank. It's not really his plant. We call it Frank's plant because it's Frankie Boy. I think we have one of these in here. I think he said he was bringing Frankie Boy. There he is, right next to me. So Frankie Boy is a style of oriental arborvitae, so very thread. It's kind of fun, almost look like hair. You can pop it up in a pot or do something fun with that. But Frankie Boy would give me the yellow color on it. You can also do some greens too, but that's a really fun, little bit different conifer if you like something. And I think this is one of the more useful plants we'll talk about today. More and more people are discovering these. I think everybody knows what a western red cedar looks like up here, right? I got 40 feet in my backyard. Can't see the sun, it's ginormous. There's a dwarf western red cedar. So I want a shrub like 3 foot by 4 foot. The benefit to that is native. That'll take some heavy soil. You know, if I'm worried about clay, I'm worried about wet, I don't have as best drainage, and some of this other stuff is too risky, that would be belongs here in our native soil. So that would thrive. Turns bronze in the winter, just like the trees do. But I would just have a nice bushy garden-sized conifer with something like that. And I think the last group here are just a couple of hemlocks. So again, we mentioned a little bit at the beginning, some things that might do a little bit more shade than sun. Hemlocks would be one that I would consider for that. If I had morning sun or a little bit of dappled light kind of in a woodland garden, we would probably use more hemlocks than any conifers because they don't need as much light. I have this one in the back of my house that gets no direct sun, and it's thrived for 20 years. This is a little miniature one called Moonfrost. It has some white on it, which is really nice in the shade, but that's a shrub, not a tree. I mean, mine's 20 years old. It's about up to my chest. You know, I've got like a 4 foot by 4 foot shrub. I don't have a gigantic tree. I can get the tree form in the one down below there called Summer Snow. You know, if I wanted something 10 feet tall, then I go buy the upright one with the same colors. But I can do low and weeping. I have one of those across the aisle in the shade garden. It looks like a ground cover. You know, it's only that tall and it just sweeps down amongst some rocks with other plants growing with it. So I can get low weeping, I can go white, I can get green, I can get yellows again. There's some pretty cool hemlocks. I thought I brought Jervis in here. Did Jervis not make it? The one in the corner right there. How cool is that? So it almost looks like it's been bonsai'd, real stiff dark green. So that's a Canadian hemlock, one we like called Jervis. that would look like a shrub again, but almost like you maybe have played with it with the clippers a little bit on the natural form. So that's a fun little plant as well. So that's Cole's prostrate, the weeper. That's a good picture of moon frost when it's in its full white glory. That would be this little guy right here. That's the one I have. Or I want the taller white for a shady spot that really brightens it up, then I'm going to look for something like that summer snow down there. And again, if white's not your thing, then we can go yellow. If yellow's not your thing, we can choose something that's green like that too. I mean, we've got some color options on most all the conifers we talked about. Okay? So there you go. Rediscover your evergreen state. And that's what I always like to say in this class. You know, we got lots of cool evergreens around here. I wouldn't change it for the world, and I wouldn't move for the world either. I like my green. But with all that green native around here, you know, add some different textures and greens or different shades, or look at some of your blues and yellows and things that turn color in the winter, because there's some really cool conifers out there I think any of us could add to our gardens going forward. Okay? So let's leave that up. We'll shut that down and get my umbrellas, my rainy umbrellas.
Thanks, Trevor.
So if, you know, with the classes here today, you've got the whole week to take advantage of the discount to next Friday, but you got 20% off all the conifers you want to grab. So if you want to do a little shopping, grab some conifers at 20% off. That's a great savings on some really cool stuff. This time of year, they're a little bit everywhere. If you're regular shoppers here, I recognize the faces. The vignette area up there, the ramps, got most everything in there, but a lot of the conifers are in displays this time of year, and I have a huge chunk up in our seasonal department. It doesn't mean they're seasonal, but we're setting up kind of a big area for folks in the winter where I can find a lot of this little cool stuff. If I want to start with something small and watch it grow and maybe save a little money, we've got a really good selection of these little LPP or quart collector conifers from Isley up there right now. We get a big batch every fall. So you'll see some of that with planters where people have planted little miniature conifers, even a little garden to enjoy over the winter. But certainly we can add those into our yard as well. So sometimes I like buying something big. I want instant gratification, but a lot of times I like doing it myself. So it's kind of fun buying the little starts and kind of watching them grow that way. You know, you got a little time to kind of nurture them along. So conifers a little bit everywhere. You got 20%. Do some shopping hopefully after class. We've still got our compost on special too through the end of the month. So buy 3 get 1 free, bags or bales. That's still on special here through the end of October. All right.
Get some and they load it up for you.
Joe will be out there to load it for you. Oh, there you go. Yeah, Joe's a great guy. He likes plants around here, so he's learning every week. He's learning some more plants. Yeah, there you go. So you got any questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
Is there anything that works to keep the squirrels from eating your yews? I don't have to worry about pruning because they do it for me.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And they just leave the branches laying on the ground.
Interesting. I don't know that I've heard that one before. You got some rambunctious squirrels.
In the front. I know. I don't
Rabbits.
know what to do.
I've had issues at my house with that, but not the squirrel. I would always go try have you tried repellents?
Oh yeah.
Which ones have you tried?
I've tried the rabbit out and the deer out.
Okay. Neither one of those. Have you tried Repelzol? It's a little spicier, like some hot pepper. I would try that and maybe try to get his mouth like, ooh, I don't want to go near that thing again, and then head the other way. And try the hot pepper style. Yeah, Repelzol's got a hot pepper wax in it that's pretty spicy. It's helped with my rabbits, I know, and I think they're worse than the squirrel is. So
these are the same squirrels that I see running away with a big sunflower in their mouth.
Oh wow,
they're awful.
Holy smokes!
I mean, the whole sunflower is in their mouth.
That's crazy. He's got quite a stash. Yeah. Try a little bit of this Repelzol has a little bit of hot pepper wax in there. I might try that. Okay. Sometimes the rabbits or deer are usually pretty close for repellents, but sometimes the rest a little bit different. I try it. I'd mix it up too. That's the other thing, is mix it up a little bit.